You're not addicted to social media. You're trapped inside a version of yourself you helped create. The longer you scroll, the harder it gets to tell where you end and the mask begins. And almost no one realizes what it's costing them. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people won't tell you. Your online persona is shaping your psychology more than your psychology is shaping your online life. Every post, every reaction, every moment of silence is training your mind, quietly, relentlessly. You don't just use social media. Over time, it uses you. And the real danger isn't distraction, it's losing touch with who you actually are beneath the performance. What if that polished version of you isn't confidence, but camouflage? What if the exhaustion you feel isn't burnout, but inner resistance? Carl Jung warned that when the mask becomes stronger than the self, the shadow takes control. And today, that battle is happening on screens, in public, at scale. The good news? Once you see the pattern, you can break it. And not by deleting your accounts, but by reclaiming authorship over who you're becoming online. In this video, you'll understand exactly how digital masks form, why they drain you, and how to integrate your online and offline self without disappearing from the modern world. This isn't about quitting social media, it's about using it without losing your soul and shaping a digital presence that actually reflects your inner truth. You don't wake up one day and decide to fake your life online. It happens quietly, almost innocently. You post, you edit, you adjust, until your digital identity starts smiling back at you in a way that feels unfamiliar. This is the birth of the persona, a carefully shaped version of you that knows how to survive on social media. It's efficient, attractive, and algorithm-friendly. But here's the catch. You slowly start living for the mask instead of through it. And without noticing, your sense of authenticity begins to blur. Think of your online presence like a storefront window. You arrange the lighting, hide the mess in the back, and display only what sells. That's not lying, it's strategy. But when the window becomes your whole house, something vital gets locked away. The more polished the image, the more pressure you feel to protect it. You're no longer expressing yourself, you're managing a brand. And brands don't rest, they perform. This is how self-expression quietly turns into self-surveillance. Now here's where it gets interesting. Whatever doesn't fit the image doesn't disappear, it sinks. This is where the shadow forms, the doubts you don't post, the anger you soften into jokes, the envy you disguise as indifference. These rejected parts don't vanish, they leak out through projection. You judge others harshly, feel irritated for no clear reason, or get pulled into online conflicts that feel oddly personal. That's the shadow knocking from behind the mask. You can see this everywhere once you know how to look. The influencer preaching balance while burning out. The motivational post hiding deep resentment, the constant positivity that feels strangely aggressive. These aren't moral failures, they're psychological signals. The archetypes are at work, shaping behavior beneath awareness. And when millions play the same roles, those patterns feed the collective unconscious, turning personal masks into cultural norms. Suddenly, everyone feels pressured, but no one knows why. So here's a quiet practice you can start today. Before you post, pause, not to censor but to notice. Ask yourself what part of you wants to be seen right now. Is it connection, validation, control, or expression? That pause builds self-awareness, and awareness opens the door to integration. You don't need to burn the mask down, just stop letting it run the show. And once you feel that tension between who you present and who you are, you'll start noticing something deeper, waiting to be explored next. At first, performing online feels harmless, almost playful. You test what lands, notice what gets likes, and naturally repeat what works. That's human. But over time, something subtle shifts. You stop asking, What do I want to express? And start asking, what will perform? Your social media presence becomes less about communication and more about optimization. And without realizing it, your persona starts leading while your real presence quietly steps aside. Performance thrives on anticipation. You're always a step ahead of yourself, curating tomorrow's reaction instead of inhabiting today's experience. Even offline moments start to feel unfinished until they're posted. A meal isn't fully enjoyed. A sunset isn't complete without proof. Presence, real grounded presence, doesn't survive well in that environment. It's too slow, too subtle, too human. And yet, it's the very thing that gives meaning to everything else. Here's the trap most people don't see. Performance creates emotional distance. You may be seen by thousands, yet feel strangely unseen. That's because performance attracts attention, not connection. Connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability doesn't always fit the algorithm. So the parts of you that crave approval stay active, while the parts that crave truth retreat into the shadow. That inner split is exhausting, and it's one of the hidden roots of digital burnout. You've probably felt this tension before. Posting something that did well but left you feeling oddly empty, or holding back a thought because it didn't match your digital identity. These moments are signals, not failures. They're invitations to notice how much energy goes into maintaining coherence between your inner life and your outer image. When that coherence breaks, projection increases. You feel irritated by others who remind you of what you're suppressing. Try a simple experiment. For 1 week, consume content slowly. Don't scroll, read. Don't skim, feel. Notice which posts energize you and which ones drain you. This builds self-awareness and reveals which archetypes you're unconsciously responding to. Performance runs on speed. Presence requires space, and once you start reclaiming that space, you'll naturally begin to notice where the pressure really comes from, which opens the door to what's hiding beneath the feed itself. Your feed doesn't just show what you like, it reflects what you avoid. Every sharp comment, every surge of outrage, every silent comparison carries information. This is where the shadow lives. Not in what you post, but in what you react to. The more intensely something triggers you online, the more likely it's touching a part of yourself you've disowned. And social media gives this process a megaphone. The shadow doesn't announce itself politely. It disguises itself as certainty, moral superiority. I would never do that. Oh, but that reaction is often a form of projection, a psychological reflex that throws unwanted traits onto others so you don't have to face them. When you call someone fake, shallow, or dangerous online, pause. Ask what part of that accusation feels emotionally charged. That charge is the clue. Neutral judgments don't sting. Notice how easily the shadow slips into public behavior. Sarcasm that feels clever but cuts deep. Outrage that feels righteous but never resolves. Performative empathy that demands applause. These aren't random habits, they're pressure valves. The persona keeps things polished, so the shadow leaks through tone, timing, and intensity. And because the internet rewards extremes, these leaks often get amplified instead of questioned. You can work with this instead of fighting it. The next time you feel compelled to comment, ask yourself one simple question. What am I defending right now? Status, identity, belonging. That pause transforms reaction into self-awareness. You don't need to suppress emotion, just redirect it inward long enough to learn from it. Growth doesn't start with being nicer online, it starts with being more honest with yourself. Over time, these individual shadows don't stay personal. They sync up. Similar reactions cluster, reinforce, and solidify into shared narratives. That's how private avoidance becomes public behavior, and personal discomfort turns into digital movements. Once you see this pattern, you'll start noticing something even bigger unfolding, how individual shadows merge into something collective, and why that matters more than you think. When consequences fade, truth doesn't always rise. Impulse does. Anonymity online doesn't reveal who you are. It reveals what you haven't integrated. Without names, faces, or accountability, the shadow finally gets room to breathe. That's why people say things online they'd never say in person. Not because they're braver, but because the persona is temporarily offline and the unfiltered self takes the mic. This is where extremes flourish. Trolling and virtue signaling look like opposites, but they're psychological twins. One attacks openly, the other hides behind moral language. Both avoid vulnerability, both rely on projection, and both feel oddly satisfying in the moment because they release bottled-up emotion. The internet becomes a pressure chamber where unexamined feelings explode instead of transform. You've probably noticed how easy it is to slip into this energy. A comment section pulls you in, your tone sharpens, your empathy narrows. Suddenly, you're not responding, you're performing dominance, righteousness, or belonging. That's an archetype taking over. When awareness drops, these patterns run automatically. And because social media rewards intensity, not reflection, the loudest shadows get the most attention. Here's a grounding practice that actually works. Before engaging anonymously, imagine saying the same words to someone sitting across from you. Not to shame yourself, just to reconnect with presence. This reintroduces integration into the moment. You're not censoring truth, you're restoring humanity. Over time, this habit retrains your nervous system to choose clarity over release. What's happening on an individual level doesn't stay there. When thousands act without identity, something ancient reappears. The crowd, the chant, the ritual. And once enough people sink into the same emotional current, individuality dissolves. That's when the digital space stops feeling personal and starts behaving like something much older and much more powerful. Something strange happens when individual voices merge online. You're no longer reacting as you, you're reacting as us. Emotion spreads faster than thought, and nuance evaporates. This is how the collective unconscious surfaces in digital form. What feels like personal outrage is often borrowed energy, amplified by repetition and rewarded by visibility. You don't just join the crowd, you become it. In these moments, responsibility thins out. When everyone's pointing fingers, no one feels accountable. That's why digital mobs form so easily. Someone must be blamed, exposed, or erased so the group can feel temporarily cleansed. Psychologically, it's ancient behavior wearing modern clothes. The shadow doesn't like silence, it prefers spectacle, and social media gives it a stage with infinite seats. Pay attention to how quickly certainty replaces curiosity in these spaces. There's no room for questions, only alignment. If you hesitate, you're suspect. If you disagree, you're dangerous. This isn't moral clarity, it's emotional contagion. The crowd rewards conformity, not truth. And the more you sync with it, the harder it becomes to hear your own inner compass. You can feel this happening in your body. Tight chest, accelerated typing, a sense of urgency that feels disproportionate. These are signals that projection is active and self-awareness is slipping. When emotion demands immediate action, pause. Step back physically. Stand up, breathe, look away from the screen. This interrupts the trance and returns agency to you. Once you see how crowds operate, you can't unsee it. Narratives repeat, roles solidify. Villains and heroes rotate, but the pattern stays the same. And that realization naturally raises a deeper question. If crowds are driven by shared, archetypal stories, what myths are being replayed right now, and how are they shaping the identities we're chasing next? Scroll long enough, and you'll notice it. The same stories dressed in new outfits, rise from nowhere success, public struggle, sudden wisdom, monetized redemption. This isn't coincidence. It's myth adapting to code. The algorithm doesn't invent meaning. It amplifies what already lives in the collective unconscious. And those ancient patterns, Heroes, mentors, saviors fit perfectly into the rhythm of social media. You're not just watching content, you're watching a modern myth machine at work. Influencers unconsciously step into archetypal roles, and audiences respond instinctively. The archetypes do the heavy lifting. When someone shares their truth, you lean in. When they fall, you judge. When they return stronger, you forgive. None of this is random. It's storytelling older than writing, compressed into 15 seconds. Here's the subtle danger. Myths bypass logic. They go straight to emotion. That's why you can feel inspired, inferior, hopeful, and exhausted all in one scroll. Your digital identity starts measuring itself against scripted journeys that were never meant to be lived literally. Comparison deepens, projection increases, and the shadow whispers, "You're behind. You're not enough. You missed your moment." Notice how quickly meaning gets outsourced. Instead of asking what your growth looks like, you borrow someone else's narrative. Morning routines, life philosophies, even pain becomes aesthetic. But when meaning is consumed instead of created, it loses weight. The persona gets louder, while inner direction gets quieter. That's when burnout sneaks in, disguised as motivation. You can flip this dynamic by reclaiming authorship. Choose one voice you genuinely trust and go deeper instead of wider. Read books that don't summarize themselves, like Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl or The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. Let ideas work on you slowly. This builds integration, not just inspiration. And once you stop living inside borrowed myths, you'll start noticing which roles culture keeps pushing you into next and why resisting them matters. Every digital space eventually crowns its saints and outlaws. Someone is suffering for the cause. Someone is breaking the rules. Someone is here to rescue everyone else. These roles feel natural because they're ancient archetypes, recycled for the screen. You don't consciously choose them. They choose you. When your digital identity is shaped more by reaction than reflection, and once you're inside one, it's surprisingly hard to step out. Take the martyr. Online, it often looks like moral exhaustion wrapped in righteousness. Constantly offended, constantly sacrificing, constantly reminding others how much pain they carry. The attention feels validating, but it locks the persona into suffering as identity. The shadow here isn't weakness, it's unexpressed anger. When pain becomes currency, healing feels like betrayal. Then there's the rebel, the one who sees through everything, mocks norms, and positions themselves as immune to manipulation. This role feels empowering, but it can quietly turn into isolation. The rebel rejects belonging before belonging can reject them. That's projection in reverse, disowning the need for connection and calling it independence. The shadow hides behind superiority. And of course, the savior, the fixer, the one who has the answers, the frameworks, the threads that promise clarity. This role feeds the ego while draining the soul. You become responsible for everyone else's awakening while neglecting your own self-awareness. The savior avoids their shadow by staying busy with other people's problems. It looks generous, but it's often a sophisticated escape. You've likely tasted at least one of these roles. Maybe you felt pulled into defending a cause non-stop, or tearing down systems without building anything new, or carrying the quiet pressure to always be the strong one. None of this makes you wrong. It makes you human inside a system that rewards extremes. Social media doesn't ask who you are. It asks which role you'll play best. The moment you see the role, loosen it, not by abandoning your values, but by questioning the performance. Ask where the energy is really going. Ask what part of you isn't being allowed to speak yet, because once these roles start cracking, something more uncomfortable and more honest begins to surface. The cost of keeping the mask intact when your inner life is asking for relief. Keeping a polished version of yourself alive takes more energy than most people admit. It's not the posting, it's the monitoring, the constant inner check, Does this align with who I'm supposed to be online? That quiet tension builds day after day, and eventually it shows up as fatigue, numbness, or restlessness. This is the hidden cost of a fragmented persona. You're spending psychic energy just to stay consistent with an image. Burnout rarely comes from doing too much. It comes from being split for too long. One part of you performs, another observes, and a third resents the whole thing. The shadow carries that resentment silently until the body speaks for it. Loss of motivation, irritability, the feeling that even success tastes flat. None of this means you're ungrateful. It means something inside you wants honesty more than approval. You can spot this pattern when growth starts feeling like pressure instead of expansion. When your digital identity demands optimism, even on days that feel heavy. When vulnerability becomes content instead of connection. The moment your inner life turns into material, intimacy thins out. And without intimacy, with yourself first, no amount of engagement can feel nourishing. Here's a practical reset that works surprisingly well. Choose one day a week to be psychologically offline, even if you're still connected. No posting, no commenting, no comparing. Use that time to read something grounding, like Meditations by Marcus Aurelius or The Untethered Soul by Michael A. Singer. These texts restore vertical depth in a horizontal world. They strengthen integration by reconnecting you with an inner axis that doesn't need applause. As this inner pressure eases, something unexpected happens. You stop craving validation, not because you're above it, but because you're fuller. The need to perform softens. And once the performance loosens its grip, a more important question begins to surface. What does it actually look like to live and express from one place instead of two? There's a quiet misunderstanding online that honesty means exposure, that the more you reveal, the more real you are. But exposure without alignment is just another performance. Integration is different. It's when what you think, feel, say, and do stop pulling in opposite directions. You don't need to show everything. You need to live coherently. And paradoxically, that coherence speaks louder than any overshare ever could. When you're integrated, your persona relaxes. You're not guarding contradictions because there are fewer of them. Your digital identity becomes an extension, not a replacement, of your inner life. That's why some people say very little online yet feel deeply authentic. Their words carry weight because they're backed by lived consistency, not emotional urgency. Think of it like tuning an instrument. Exposure is turning the volume up. Integration is tuning the strings. One makes noise louder, the other makes music possible. When your inner values match your outer actions, projection drops naturally. You stop reacting so intensely to others because there's less inner conflict to defend against. The shadow doesn't vanish, but it stops running the show. You can practice this in small, grounded ways. Before posting, ask, does this reflect something I'm actually living right now? If the answer is no, pause. Not forever, just long enough to realign. Journal privately what you won't post publicly. That private honesty strengthens self-awareness far more than public confession ever could. As integration deepens, you'll notice a shift in how you engage with social media. You consume less, but absorb more. You speak less, but with clearer intention. And this naturally leads to something even more subtle. A desire to shape your presence, not for attention, but for meaning. Once that urge appears, you're ready to ask a bigger question. What kind of trace do you actually want to leave behind? Whether you like it or not, you're already leaving a trace. Every reaction, every share, every silence contributes to a pattern. Your social media activity isn't just content, it's conditioning. It trains your attention, reinforces certain archetypes, and feeds specific loops in the collective unconscious. The real question isn't if you're influencing the digital space, but how consciously you're doing it. Most people think legacy is something you worry about later, but in the digital world, it's being written in real time. Your digital identity becomes a psychological footprint others walk through. Are you amplifying fear or clarity, division or depth, reflex or reflection? These choices feel small in isolation, yet repetition gives them weight. Meaning isn't created by single acts, it's created by patterns sustained over time. A conscious legacy doesn't require perfection, it requires intention. When your persona is aligned with your values, your presence becomes stabilizing instead of reactive. You don't need to educate everyone or call out every wrong. Sometimes the most powerful signal is restraint. Not every thought deserves oxygen. Not every emotion needs a stage. This is where maturity quietly separates itself from noise. Here's a grounding exercise you can apply immediately. Imagine someone discovering your posts 5 years from now, not your highlights, your patterns. What would they learn about how you relate to yourself, to conflict, to truth? This thought experiment strengthens self-awareness and reduces unconscious projection. You stop posting to be seen and start posting to stand for something. And once you operate from that place, something shifts. Engagement becomes a byproduct, not a goal. You're no longer feeding the system blindly, you're shaping it deliberately. This doesn't end the journey, it sharpens it, because when you become aware of the legacy you're building, a deeper responsibility emerges, one that asks not just who am I online, but who am I becoming through. Now comes the part most people avoid, the application. Insight without action fades fast. So ask yourself honestly, where are you still performing instead of living? Where has your online behavior become a reflex instead of a choice? You don't need to fix everything today. You just need to notice one pattern and interrupt it. Awareness is the first act of freedom. You've seen how personas form, how shadows leak, how crowds amplify unconscious behavior, and how myths quietly shape your identity. The invitation now is simple, but not easy. Act with intention. Post less impulsively. Consume more consciously. Choose depth over noise. When something triggers you online, don't rush to react. Pause and ask what it's revealing about you. That single pause can change your psychology over time. Remember, social media is not neutral. It either fragments you or integrates you, depending on how you use it. So what kind of presence do you want to embody? One that feeds outrage, comparison, and exhaustion, or one that reflects clarity, honesty, and inner alignment? The digital world doesn't need more opinions. It needs more integrated humans. Let me leave you with a few questions. Sit with them. Don't rush the answers. Who are you performing for online? What part of you is still waiting to be acknowledged? And if your digital footprint shaped your future self, would you be proud of the direction it's pointing? If this video gave you language for something you've been feeling but couldn't name, stay with us. Subscribe to Mind's Silent Echo. Turn on notifications, and keep walking this path of depth, self-awareness, and inner clarity. There's much more to uncover, and the work only gets more meaningful from here.